Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Like many of you know, I've been here for 3 years and I still don't have a therapy space. I was told that if I need funds for the therapy space, then I have to fill out an ISP. And I wasn't sure what that was or what it should look like or what it should involve. So I went and I looked at the SIAS policy. Now, the SIAS policy is the law about how inclusive education should be incorporated into the South African Education Department. So I had a look at the SIAS policy and I had a look at the Schools Act, and I worked through quite a few documents and I came across quite some interesting facts, and I thought that maybe if I share these with you, it would make your life also a little bit easier in understanding how support and learning barriers are identified in special schools, and how our children, according to the law, should be supported. All right, so the SIAS policy said that earlier years, learners were, based on their disabilities, learners were given a weighting, and then based on that, schools provided support. But then the SIAS policy, and I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, the SIAS policy is really an amazing piece of work. And the people who wrote this really had a heart for learners with learning barriers and how to support them. So they said there's a lot of learners who doesn't thrive in mainstream because they have disabilities that is not really visible to the eye and can't be categorized as, hearing or vision. But that doesn't mean that these kids doesn't need support, because they are still not thriving in mainstream. And the thing is, in an Alsen school, we need to do something different, something that they can't do in mainstream. Otherwise, we're not really supporting them, and otherwise they could have just stayed in mainstream. If the amount of our support is just adapting their worksheets, they could have done that in mainstream as well. So what are we supposed to do different? All right, if we start at the child, because that is always where we start at the child. There are 11 learning barriers that makes up a child's disability, or invisible disability, if we can call it that. And I'm going to teach those to you now, and I'm going to teach it to you in a way that you know it forever and you won't forget it again. I learn in pictures, so I'm going to teach it to you in pictures. So the first learning barrier is socioeconomics. If we look at this picture, right, it's a big number 1, and it says that if a child doesn't have the basic services, then he or she is at risk, and they have a learning barrier, because if they are hungry, or they don't have running water, or they don't have transport to get to school, or they don't have proper sanitation or healthcare or social welfare or clothes or access to hygiene, then this child is not in an optimal space to learn. So those are also part of our human rights. So that is learning barrier number 1. Learning barrier number 2 is our at-risk child. This child is being abused or neglected, or this child is has mental health issues or chronic health conditions. There might be substance abuse, there might be HIV, and also COVID. So if you think about it, all of our kids at the moment is at-risk learners because they are all influenced by COVID. So the second learning barrier is at-risk children. Now the third learning barrier, if you look at this picture, is all about attitude. Look at those muscles, right? So the attitude can have a big impact on a child's ability to perform at school. And that includes the child's attitude, the parent's attitude, the teacher's attitude, the support staff's attitude, and also the other learners at school's attitude. And this attitude includes the acknowledgement of differences, and the empathy we have, the knowledge we have with regards to differences and disabilities and difficulties, and how we empower these role players, and then the support we give. So attitude is all about accepting that we are not doing things the same way we did it years ago. It didn't work then, so we are trying something new now. And if you are not willing to try to change or try to adapt to this new policy, then you have an attitude that is a learning barrier to our learners. Then number 4, very important, an inflexible curriculum. So if a child is at a school where the curriculum is not adapted, then this creates a learning barrier. And adapting the curriculum doesn't stop at the subjects that you teach. It also includes accommodations, and it needs to be individual, and it needs to match the level of functioning of the child. So you can't just say, all right, we are changing the subject, and that's where the differentiation of the curriculum stops. You, as a teacher, should be allowed to adapt the curriculum within your within your class to meet the child's level of functioning and the child's understanding. And if that is not allowed in your classroom, then that creates a barrier to learning. Then number 5 is communication. Look at that big mouth, right? So there's 2 parts to this learning barrier. The one part is if the child can't communicate, either expressing himself or understanding what you are saying. Now, it can be a disability where the child aren't able to talk, or it can be a language barrier where the child doesn't understand what you are saying, or you don't understand the child. But it also can be the way that things are communicated, the respect that is shown, the reciprocity, and whether both parties are allowed to speak and are heard, whether there is collaboration, the tone of voice. So communication is much more than just the ability to say what you need to say. Right. Then the 6th learning barrier is infrastructure. So if there's not the right infrastructure to support the needs of this child, then we can't help this child. So let's say, for example, the child has a learning barrier number 1, poverty, and we want to support him, but we don't have the necessary infrastructure. So there's another learning barrier 6. Then we can't give the support that this child needs. Right. So infrastructure is very important. Then number 7, that is our support services. As you can see, this tortoise needs a little bit of support to walk. Right. So a child needs access to support services. The teachers needs access to support services. Support services can only be given appropriately if there is the necessary infrastructure, the necessary adaptive devices, if there is trained professionals, and if these structures is not in place, then even though they are support services, they are inaccessible and inappropriate, and then it's adding to the learning barriers of the child. Right, then the learning barrier number 8 is parental involvement. Right, so if the child doesn't have parental involvement, or the type of parental involvement is not constructive, that adds to the child's inability to thrive at school. So if there's a family structure that is not typical, or if the home situation is not healthy or safe, then it adds to the child's difficulties to learn. If the parents are not employed, or the educational level of the parent is not of appropriate level, then this can add to the child's difficulties. If the child is the head of the home, if the parents are sick or there's chronic health issues, if there's difficulty with siblings, or if there's abuse. So even the parental involvement can create a learning barrier. Then, number 9, only one of the 11 is disability. And at the 9th learning barrier, there you'll see this little oak only has one leg. We have the different disabilities, and that includes vision, hearing, physical disabilities, communication, intellectual, that we see at our school often, MID, SID, SLD, then mental health, chronic health, neurodevelopmental disabilities like CP, epilepsy, autism, and then also the accessibility that the school has to offer for these kids. Then, number 10, right, training or human resource development. And here you'll see the number 1 is very unsure and confused, and the number 10 is a smiley face with a hat. So human resource development is very close to my heart. And this doesn't mean necessarily training. This means that our child needs humans in school that is a resource to him. So if our teachers are not allowed to be a resource in every possible way that they can, then it is a learning barrier. And if you are not allowed to develop yourself in order to help the child in your class in the best possible way, then it's a barrier to learning for this child. And then number 11, and a lot of focus is placed on this, is our LTSM and assistive devices and technology. And it's true, it's needed. If there's not assistive technology, then our child can't learn and aren't supported to thrive at school. But these assistive devices needs to be different and above and beyond what we have at mainstream. Because if it's just the same as the assistive devices they have in mainstream, then we are not doing anything different. All right, so number 1, the girl that's living on the street. Number 2, the child that is abused and bent over. Number 3, the muscles, so the attitude. Number 4, the book, so it's the curriculum. Number 5, the man with the big mouth, communication. Number 6, the house with the round foundation, so poor infrastructure. Number 7, the tortoise with a walking stick, so support services. Number 8, the 2 owls on top of each other, so that is parental involvement. Number 9, the man with only one leg, disability. Number 10, the confused man and the round face with education, the graduation cap, so human resource development. And number 11, the LTSM and assistive devices. Right, now, how do we apply this to the kid? If we go and take the kid now, any learner in your class, and we make a mind map, and we put that child in the middle, and we look at factors from learning barrier number 1 that influence our child, and factors from learning barrier 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. We look at the infrastructure, the support services, the parental involvement, the disabilities the child may have, the human resources the child have access to, and the assistive devices. And we go and look at that child's situation, and we start identifying the difficulties that that child might experience in his life that is causing him not to be able to thrive at school. Then we realize that even when a child doesn't have a disability that is very visible and in your face. Just because this child looks like an able-bodied child does not mean that this child doesn't need support. Sometimes the biggest barriers to learning are invisible. Right, so now that we've seen our child and we have a better picture of what our child's difficulties are and his learning barriers are, we can decide on what kind of support this child needs. Now, the type of supports that can be given is 5, right? The thumb is always people, so specialized staff. The index finger is the finger that you use to press buttons, so this is the assistive devices. Then the middle finger is the tallest, and that's where the cap goes. So that is training and human resource development. Okay. Number 4 is the curriculum. Okay. And then number 5, our pinky, makes our grip strong. And that's why this is infrastructure. If we don't have the proper and appropriate infrastructure, the impact of these 4 services is not as good as it can be. All right. So now if we go back to the child and the mind map of all the difficulties he has, then for every single difficulty and every single learning barrier your child experiences, you can say, all right, what is the staff that this child needs? Is it that there's not enough staff? Is it that I need an assistant? Is it that the staff at the school is not specialized enough and we need to go for training? Or is it that we need a social worker, or we need an occupational therapist? Or is it that we just need more teachers because our learner-teacher ratio is not appropriate? Okay, then the second one is our assistive devices. And we go and have a look at what specific assistive device will help this child to do better in class and will help me to teach this child. Then the third one, the training. And we have to be careful not to confuse this with training to become a teacher, because you are all teachers and you are all specialists. Actually, you shouldn't be called teachers. You should be called specialized educators, because you do something different here than a teacher in mainstream. So this training isn't necessarily to make you a better teacher. You are already a good teacher. This training is to make sure that all the parties involved understand how special schools is different. And this is also part of the management. So how should this child's case be handled? So when the child comes from mainstream with the SNA 1 and 2, what is the role then? What is the next steps in the SIAS process for the special school? And that is where the SNA 3 and 4 is supposed to be filled out. And I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, the SNA 3 and 4 therapy-wise has never been filled out, and my expertise has never been considered. So the SNA 3 and 4 is where the support package that needs to come with the child to make sure that he gets the resources for the support that he needs at school is implemented. So my experience is that the child is enrolled and that support is expected, but the support package doesn't come with the child, because the level of support and the areas of support according to the learning barriers is not addressed, and it's not managed. So this number 3 is where this should be addressed. Okay, then number 4 is the curriculum, and that is where you in class should be allowed to support this child by by adapting the curriculum so that it fits this child's level of functioning. And if the way in which the curriculum in your class is adapted is similar to the way it is adapted in mainstream, then what is the reasoning behind placing the child in a special school? Shouldn't the child just stayed in mainstream school then? So you should be allowed to change the curriculum as you see fit. Right, and then if we look at infrastructure, so we tend to think that infrastructure is only needed for physically disabled children, and that because we don't have children in wheelchairs, we don't need physical adaptations or environmental adaptations. But for our learners who has difficulty with bladder control, they need access to a bathroom. And just because they don't have a physical disability doesn't mean that they are not disabled enough to have access to the environment. So environmental access is still a very individual assessment. And if this child needs access to specific infrastructure, if this child needs access to a therapy area, if this child needs access to a feeding scheme or recreational area or a sick bay that is on ground floor, then that is enough of a reason to get environmental access. The SIAS policy also say that we shouldn't just have physical and environmental access for the children we currently have in school, but we should envision environmental access to the children we would like to be able to assist. There might be a learner who is wheelchair bound who want to come to KwaZulu school, but because we don't have access, this child can't get enrolled, and that should not be the case. Right, so then how do we do the ISP? So if we then fill in the form, we have a look at the child, we have a look at the learning barrier, and we explain the individual situation. Then we look at what the school already has, and we look at what the school needs. And then we base our ISP motivation on why the school needs this and how it will assist the child to thrive better at school. And can you see that this is not just based on his scholastic achievements? This is based on the child as a whole. And I think that is what we need to keep in mind. So I have all these documents. If you need them, you can come and get them from me. And if you have any other questions, you're welcome to come and have a chat with me. This is not my opinion. This is the law. This is what it's supposed to be like. And I know that we are still in a process of incorporating this, but we have to make a start, and we have to understand it to make a start. Just one last thing. I want you for a moment just to go and put yourself there in the center where the child is, and have a look at the learning barriers that you experience that prevent you from supporting a child and from helping a child to thrive in our special school setting. Do you have social economic barriers? Do you experience being at risk? Are you being abused? Are you being influenced by the pandemic? Do you experience bad attitudes? Do you experience difficulty differentiating the curriculum? Do you have difficulties with communication? Do you feel that you are being heard? Are you involved and acknowledged in collaboration with choices or decisions that influence you? Do you feel that you are being respected? Is there infrastructure that prevents you from being a good specialized educator? Do you have access to this specialized support staff? Do you have access to information with regards to the parental involvement of these learners? And do you have access to the disabilities that these children are facing? And are your class accessible to accommodate these disabilities? Are you allowed to ask for the human resource development that you want, or is that decided for you? Are you expected to develop yourself, but the processes that are supposed to be incorporated according to the SIAS process are not being incorporated? And do you have access to the LTSM and the assistive devices that you need? And are you receiving the support that you need? Do you get the staff that you need? Do you get the assistive devices do you need? Do you get the resource development that you need? Are you being heard? Are you being respected? Are you part of the collaboration? Do you have influence on the curriculum that is taught in your class? And do you have environmental access? And then you ask yourself, why or why not? And what am I doing about it? So I hope this helped you a little bit to understand this perspective from which inclusive education should be approached. And I hope that you feel that you are supported, even if it's just by having information. I hope you have a wonderful day.